What's up, guys? Emily here with emlovz, and Niki Davis-Fainbloom, also known as Miss Bloom, is joining me today. She is a New York City-based sex writer, educator, and coach. The goal of her work is to use scientific research, humor, and practical instruction to help people develop the skills to have healthier and more satisfying romantic and sexual relationships. She received her master's degree at New York University in psychology, focusing on sexual dysfunction. She then worked at Mount Sinai Hospital for 3 years as a researcher and lecturer, training students and professionals about consent, sexual violence, and sexuality. Niki's now a freelance educator. She's a frequent lecturer at conferences and continuing education programs, as well as at sex expos and sex positive communities. She's also facilitated numerous training sessions on a range of topics, including consent, dirty talk, which I want to get into, polyamory, sexual communication, and how to support survivors of violence. So Niki, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited.
Thank you for that lovely intro. I sound pretty cool. I like it.
Yeah, right? Totally. I love it. I love that you're very scientific in what you teach. I'm super data-driven person, did a 100 data experiment in college, and all that data helps to inform the coaching that I do. And I help men with dating. And so I love that you help people with sex and also like all the things that come along with it. It's not just sex, it's not just consent, but it's also like, how do we talk about sex? How do we talk about safety? How do we talk about these things? Maybe even like somebody's dating somebody who has a history of sexual abuse. How does that communication go when you're first learning that about a partner?
It's just, we're not raised to talk about sex. So it's so hard when folks are having these conversations for the first time, and it's supposed to be like their earlier sexual encounters, but we're not really given any information about what it's supposed to look like. How do we even know what we like? How do we know if sex is good or not good? So I think it's so important that people like us are like using science and sort of spreading the word to normalize communication and give folks the skills to have just satisfying sex.
Yeah, I love it. I think, hey, we could all use more satisfying sex. I don't think there's any shortage of that. So it can always get better and more fulfilling. I wanted to start out with consent because consent is such an interesting thing. Coming in as a millennial, I'm being educated by the new generation, and I'm like, oh, there's some things that maybe weren't okay for my generation. So can you tell me a little bit about what the modern man should know about consent?
Yeah. So I think it has been shifting, and I think the shift sort of started with Me Too, and it's been really profound because it's sort of normalizing this level of consent that wasn't normal. So the way they used to teach it was that if someone doesn't want something, they'll say a clear no, and that's it. So then any type of sexual assault or whatever is just when you sort of go past that line. But now we're learning, now that we understand the way trauma works and the way the body works, that it's not always as clear as that. And it's sort of on both partners when you're engaging in a sexual encounter to make sure that the person's verbal and nonverbal cues show that they actually want to be doing this. Because when I work with people, it's like the vast majority of people only want to be with someone who wants to have sex with them. It's just sort of understanding the ways that we can show that and shifting towards asking things out loud, because sometimes nonverbal signals can be complex and confusing. So just by body language, like I could be super into someone and I show that by stepping away from them and not talking to them at all. Everyone has their own way of like showing that they're turned on and showing they like something. For some people, when they're about to orgasm, they're quiet and that's just how they enjoy pleasure. But for other people, that might be discomfort or feeling like they don't want to do what's happening. So it's like, instead of just looking at the behaviors, the shift is towards normalized communication before, during, and after to make sure that both people really want to do it. Because you really don't want to be that asshole that's pushing boundaries when the person you're with doesn't want to be with you, because that's just not cool. And I think most people don't want that. So I don't know why we're still sometimes normalizing pressure or like these types of things that were sort of vestiges of our past that we're moving away from.
Totally. So with regards to consent and dirty talk, how do you begin dirty talk in an early relationship? Like I work a lot with the courting phase and the first couple dates into the relationship. So how do you broach that? How do you bring that into an early relationship in a way that you feel is consensual?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think it's not really like on the first date, you should just be like, so like I'm really loud during sex, or so I really like to yell out the word slut while I'm coming. Like these are not the things we necessarily want to say. And I think you sort of do need some tact in terms of how to bring up sexual communication. So for me, I think of dirty talk in sort of like a more broad term than I think the way folks usually use it. So I define it as sexually explicit speech or conversation intended to seduce, arouse, communicate, or inform a partner about a preference. So it can happen virtually, before, during, or after an encounter. And I think the way you could bring this up early in conversations is sort of asking someone, hey, what are your turn-ons? Or like, what do you like? Or if maybe you're making out, you can say, just ask them sort of like what type of words they like to use to describe their different body parts, because I think it can really turn someone off if you use a term that they don't like or they don't resonate with. So I would say, instead of sort of taking that risk while you're already having sex with them and having it either go well or not go well, it's sort of from the beginning stages, especially if you feel that there's a sexual connection happening, when it feels right, like maybe not before you make out or something. Like it's good to sort of get to establish that there is going to be some form of sexual connection. But once it feels comfortable, just sort of asking them, hey, like, what are you into? I think that's broad enough that someone can share specifics in terms of how do they like to refer to their body, but also sort of more broad things where it's like, are you turned on by power? Is that what you like? What type of words do you like to use? And how can you enhance a sexual encounter with your words? Because it's like sex happens through all the senses, but one of the clearest way to express what's happening is finding a way to communicate that. And it's really difficult because I think oftentimes we only learn about dirty talk through porn, which most of it is made for men by men. So I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but it's sort of showing one sort of narrow example of what sexual communication during sex can be. And it can be so much more than that. So I think I often tell people to sort of forget whatever you've learned and seen and just like figure out how you feel and what would turn you on. And like a lot of that is experimenting with someone you feel comfortable with.
Yeah. And do you recommend, well, I like what you said about having examples, because I just grew up, I guess, in a super like sex wasn't discussed. I feel like I am just now, as an older woman, or like a, in my mid 30s, getting familiar with like, how can I even see what I like, right? I think that that's a new phase that's happening. So I love that you say give examples and say, well, do you like power dynamic? Do you like this? Because I think that if someone just asked me like, what do you like? I'd be like, oh,
it's a really hard question. Yeah.
yeah.
Me too. It's like, and it also changes depending on the partner, depending on the mood. It's not like a stagnant thing, but I often recommend folks, have you heard of the yes, no, maybe list? It's quite cool. It's just like a series of basically all things sex. So you can go through the list and be like, oh, like, am I interested in spanking? Would I be into anal sex? So just going through the list, and it's like, if say you're not sure, you can at least have a list to go through and be like, ooh, this might be interesting. Or like, it's a hard no on this.
Oh, and so you should share that with your partner.
Yeah, at some point, maybe not on a first date,
yeah.
but I think at some point, like especially maybe after you've had sex a couple times, you could sort of share what are one or two things you'd be interested in trying and see how your partner feels about that, if that's something they're excited by, or if for them, that's maybe a boundary.
I love it. I love it. What do you think? Well, I feel like I already have an idea of what you're going to say, but what do you think makes great sex?
I think you probably know exactly what I'm going to say, which is pretty well, it's ridiculous. Every single article I write about every topic, it comes down to like figuring out what you want and then saying it out loud. And I think that's what makes sex good. So it's like, if in your head, you're not in the moment, you're worrying about something, you're like, do I look good in this angle? Or are they having a good time? Or like, oh, my leg's going to cramp. Should I tell them, or should I keep doing this position that's uncomfortable? It's like, no, just say it out loud. And that's what makes sex good. And realize that you are confident, because saying it out loud involves a confidence that I think a lot of folks find really sexy. And even if the confidence is being like, hey, I'm getting a cramp, let's switch positions. I think if someone said that to me, I'd be like, that's dope. They want to have a good time. They care about their desires, but also don't be selfish about it. So also equally be like, does this position feel good for you? Or if maybe it's a man who's dating a woman, asking them like, because I think it's not common. A lot of women don't orgasm in their first time with a man. So it's like asking them, hey, is there anything that would make this more pleasurable for you? normalize using toys during sex, because I think oftentimes it's like women don't usually orgasm from penetration without other types of stimulation. So
Right.
how do we bring in the type of stimulation that will feel good for both partners and prioritize both partners' pleasure without thinking about what you've seen in porn and what you think sex should be, or like the romantic smooth examples that you've seen in the movies where no one's talking and you just like understand each other because you're that good at
Yeah. Right. So what would you tell a couple or people that had just started dating, but they have a great connection, but they have totally different preferences in the bedroom? Like maybe one person is super kinky and the other person is super vanilla. What kind of like advice would you give?
That's hard. I work with a lot of couples with that, and it's really difficult because it really ends up being sort of finding a middle ground. And you don't like to say compromise when it comes to sex, but I do think that that's the way it works. So I don't think anyone should ever push their boundaries or do something that feels like a hard no to them. But I think sometimes in sex, it's like trying new things and not knowing how you're going to feel about it. So maybe initially you're like, I'm not sure about this, but sometimes you might be surprised what you like, especially if it's often one partner that's more experienced and another partner that has less experiences. And maybe, especially if they're raised religious or all these other factors make them less open to trying new things. So I would say if it feels good for you to sort of do a little bit of an exchange. So sometimes maybe one partner chooses what you do for 10 minutes and the other partner switches, while the whole time you have a safe word, or you have a way that if a partner actually doesn't want to do it, they don't do it. But I think it really takes experimenting, and you might be surprised sort of how different preferences can overlap in ways, but the only way to do that is through experimenting and communicating about it.
Okay. Okay. And so what if you in the past have communicated with somebody and they were like, oh, I don't like that. How would you bring it back up in a safe space where maybe you could do the yes, no, maybe list? How would you recommend having that conversation?
It's super hard. So my specialty is working with folks who have really extreme fetishes. So sort of unknown things. So I work with folks like sharing with their partner, I'm actually really turned on by sneezes, or like I'm actually really into farts. So it's things that like initially you might not think of as sexual and you might almost giggle. So it's like, how do we have these conversations that are actually really important to people and are like part of their identity without making the other person go, like that's weird. Because I think the main issue is, as a society, we're really not sex positive yet. So it's like, even if our partner loves us and cares about us, they might not have the tools to know how to handle out their preferences or less common preferences. And I think that's why it's sort of hard to put yourself out there. But I would say definitely have the conversation not during sex, so no partner feels pressured to try anything right away. And maybe don't try to make it serious, just try to like make it fun. And I would say, so say if you want to share that you're turned on by something or you want to try something, my first question wouldn't be about you. It would be like, hey, do you have a fantasy that you want to try? Is there anything that I could do to enhance our sex life? And then hopefully the person will respond sharing something that you'd be into. And then maybe they'll say, hey, what about you? And you can say, yeah, I'm really turned on by whatever this thing is. And I think sometimes there are ways to find that middle ground, but there are some cases where folks just, it's too different and it's really hard to maintain that together. So when that happens, it's sort of like the options are, is this partner okay with exploring their fantasy or whatever it is just through porn and through fantasy and through masturbation? Or is it something that they feel that they need to explore in person? And if it's the latter, then it's like, are we going to open up our relationship, or is it just that this is not working? And it's sad when that happens, but I think that's sort of better than staying together with this conflict that feels like there's no solution for, because eventually there'll be resentment and it won't really be happy.
Totally. Do you feel like if somebody was to start dating someone and they're like, have such a good connection, but the first time they have sex, it's not a match, is there hope for this couple?
100%, yes. So I would say most of my first time sex have been like pretty mediocre. What about for you? I don't know. I find it takes a while to get comfortable. I think it takes, in my head, I was like the 17th time is sort of when you know. Like, I feel like you kind of need a few to be like trying new things, comfortable, communicating. I think it's very normal for the first time to be kind of meh. So I would say the second time, just come in with new ideas, come in with a positive attitude, and it's definitely not a lost cause, I don't think.
Okay, well, that's good. That's good to know for sure. I love it. Let's see. In your opinion,
Mhm.
does porn help or hurt someone's sex life?
I think it can do either. I think it depends on the type of porn and the type of person. So I would say there is a lot of mainstream porn that, as I already said, it's mostly made for men by men. So it shows a male fantasy. But
Mhm.
that's not to say that there's anything wrong with that. It's just you sort of need to know that what you're consuming isn't the way sex actually happens.
Mhm.
But I still think for some people, it can be helpful to sort of think of new positions or new words or new dynamics to explore. So for some folks, it can be affirming, especially people with more extreme fetishes. It could be helpful for them to be like, oh, this is how I can explore this. And maybe there's nothing wrong with me. But I would say for most people, or for a lot of people, it sort of gives us unrealistic expectations for what sex is.
Mhm.
So the way it works is often they'll have a 40-minute scene that they cut down to 7 minutes. So any type of discomfort or weird angles or funny sounds that bodies make, all of that is cut out.
Mhm.
And there is a conversation about consent that happens, but it's usually before the actors are on screen. So it
Mhm.
normalizes not talking about consent. So it sort of shows this example of sex that in a lot of ways is not accurate. It also shows way more male pleasure and male orgasms than female pleasure or vulval pleasure. So
Mhm.
that's another big problem, because it can kind of make some men see that and think that maybe sex is really about their pleasure. And there's less examples that normalize using sex toys during penetration, having like long oral sex. Because I think they often show that like the main act tends to be when the man orgasms, at least when we're talking like in heterosexual sex.
Mhm.
And I think that that's problematic because we deserve to get ours too. And it normalizes this part of society that's just a problem that we're stepping away from. But I think as long as you know that, there's nothing wrong with enjoying it.
Yeah. How do you coach, assuming that you do, coach women into making sure that they're getting their pleasure as well?
Yes, I think that's super important. So part of that is confidence building, because unfortunately, just the world we're living in, a lot of us don't know that other people care about our pleasure and want to give us pleasure. And they'd rather it takes a long time and that we get ours than for us to fake it or like do whatever it is or to make sex just about the man. So I
Mhm.
think I used to always get in my head because I take a really long time to orgasm. And I
Mhm.
used to be like, is he having fun? What's going on? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it took me a while to shift that and be like, how dope is it that he gets to eat me out for 40 minutes? That's great. And it's like, once I shifted that in my head, it's sort of confidence and like knowing you deserve pleasure and then having sort of clear techniques to ask for your pleasure. And to realize that if you're with someone that doesn't prioritize your pleasure, they're probably a schmuck.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
man, there's a lot of education that I think is happening and needs to happen. So
Yeah.
grateful for the work that you're doing. Thank you on behalf of all women.
You too. We're out there. We're doing our thing.
Right, right. Okay, so what should a man do if he's dating a woman who has a history of sexual trauma or he suspects that she might have a history of sexual trauma?
Mhm. So I would say, first of all, it's unfortunate that you often don't know, but I kind of tell everyone to go into relationships assuming that their partner has experienced some type of trauma, because unfortunately, that's just the world we're living in. It's slowly shifting, but it seems like a lot of folks have experienced coercion or pressure. And I think the best way to do that is to sort of be the exact opposite of this stereotype.
Mm.
So instead of being pushy at all or even assertive, let them make the first move when it comes to sex. And I also find that that's sexy, even for folks without trauma. Like there's something nice about someone who's just there and present and connecting with you and doesn't seem to be wanting that one thing that we kind of feel like a lot of men want from us.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say, don't sort of push them in asking about the specifics of their trauma. But if it feels like the right time, let them know, hey, just so you know, I'm here for you if you want to share what happened. I'm here to support you. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm sorry that happened to you. Just sort of being a supportive partner that way and creating space where they can talk. And if they do talk, just sort of not making it about you, because oftentimes you want to be like, oh, that reminds me of that time when this happened to me, but it's like, no, it didn't. And even if it did, that's not, this time is sacred and it's for the person to share what they happened, because oftentimes the significance of the first time someone reveals their trauma is really profound. So the way someone responds affects if they tell people later, affects how they feel about their trauma. So it's really important to engage in all those active listening skills, to be there for the person. And then if you're going to sort of be sexually with this person, ask them, is there anything I can do to help you feel more safe or more comfortable moving forward? Because oftentimes trauma is a weird thing and it's not the way we'd imagine it. So it could be that someone got sexually assaulted with someone in a yellow coat and now they just hate yellow. So then just don't wear yellow around them. It's not that hard, right?
Yeah.
Or it's like if someone like came behind them, maybe they don't like doggy style. So there's often these sort of ways that you can try to help them from getting triggered in the moment. But it's best to have conversations about that before, but again, never be pushy about asking about specifics. So some people, all they want to share is like, I've experienced something, and that's sort of enough. So from there, just ask, is there anything I can do? And if not, then sort of just hold that and just like make sure not to be at all pushy, never ask anything more than once, sort of put the ball in their court sexually, I would say.
I love it. Do you feel like a woman would make the move in that scenario, or do you feel like the guy would go to the friend zone if he didn't make a move? Curious about your opinion.
That's a good question. I think it really depends on the specific humans.
Okay.
I think some people would let the tension build over time, and then eventually the girl would be like, fuck it, I need to make this happen, let's go. But I think you're right that for some people that might lead to the friend zone. So it's sort of, it needs to be played out in the situation. So if it is a situation where it feels like the woman isn't going to make the first move, maybe just instead of waiting for the perfect moment and just going for the kiss, I would do that extra step of being like, hey, can I kiss you? Just to make sure, because then ideally, and once you ask that, look for their verbal and nonverbal cues. So if they say, okay, but their shoulders get hunched and they step back, that sounds like they don't actually want to kiss you, right? But if they say, yes, finally, let's go, then that's good. But yeah, I do think it's very individual specific in terms of like how to proceed. That's why it's hard. Like a lot of the dating advice I give depends on who I'm working with. It's hard to find like standardized stuff other than just not being shitty.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, to wrap up, I'm curious a little bit about how you got into this work and what inspired it for you. And then also would love to let the viewers know how they can get in touch with you if they'd like to learn more.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So I've just been fascinated by sex my whole life. So throughout my childhood, I was the person that people would ask their strange, interesting questions to. And then it was only after I got my master's degree that I realized that I could actually make a profession out of this. So it's only been in like the past 5 years that I've developed my coaching services. I'm working on writing a book towards demystifying fetishes, sort of working to normalize these desires that are still sort of on the outskirts of society and understand them better. And I love facilitating workshops. I'm in New York, so I do a monthly sex trivia night, and I'm doing like dirty talk workshops and all that stuff. So to follow me online, it's Miss Bloom Sex Educator on Instagram. My website is nikidavisf.com, NIKIDAVISF.com. I work with couples and individuals who are working to enhance their sex life.
Love it. Awesome. Make sure to follow Niki, you guys. And if you like this video, make sure to like it, subscribe to the channel, and leave us a comment in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll catch you next time.